I would say tomorrow's a big day for Penn State football with a big decision for one of its top recruits, but honestly, that's been a lot lately. There are a lot of big days for Penn State football. When you want to win at the top, that's how that goes. And today we're here to discuss all of that. I think it's going to be a fun show. We've got kind of a new direction I want to go with some of the recruiting conversation at the end, so stay tuned for that. We're going to do a top contender segment. So Penn State is the top contender for a lot of really good football prospects. And every year there seems to be a flavor, whether it's Penn State versus Clemson. One year it felt like it was Penn State versus South Carolina a whole lot. Maybe it's Michigan in a traditional battle. Who are the top contenders for Penn State's top contenders, their top prospects? That's coming up at the end of the show. But there's a lot to get to before then. So before we get to any of that, I will ask up front. We've been doing this for a long time. I feel like we've proven to you that this is not going to suck. So please like the video. If we can get 500 likes on the video, that would be massive, and that would help a lot with people knowing about the show and spreading it. Of course, if you're listening on the podcast version, if you interact with us on especially Apple Music, that is super helpful, or Apple Podcasts, or whatever they call it. You leave a review, 5-star review, and if you leave a question, we'll get you on a future mailbag segment. All that great stuff, and two of the best to do it, Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz, Blue White Illustrated recruiting reporters. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Fitz, I want to start with you. A round of applause. Well received, excellent reporting yesterday on Amari Campbell. Excellent stuff on the whole story of how Penn State got one of its recent portal commitments. So if you want to just give us the highlights of what you learned and what you wrote about at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com yesterday.
Yeah, sat down and that one just kind of flowed, didn't it? It was like 2,000 words by the end. It was definitely not intended to be that long, but we're talking about how Penn State landed Campbell, what Penn State's outlook is, what this means for 2025 for linebackers, what this means for 2025 for the team, which is huge. We talked a little bit about that on Tuesday, but it's I think it's more statement than anything. T. Frank, you and I have talked about Campbell, and we've both watched more North Carolina defense than we would care to admit. There's probably a support group for that somewhere, because that was terrible. We had the conversation this week about Penn State's defense is great, and if they're good, Penn State fans are going to be like ripping their hair out. We watched North Carolina's defense yesterday. Oh my God, they're bad. Like bad scheme, bad spatial awareness, bad everything. Yeah. Like you watch Campbell and you talk about, okay, well, this guy gets swallowed up by offensive linemen. He's got offensive linemen coming at him just unabated. Like it is ridiculous to see this kind of scheme at that kind of level. And that's probably why they gave up 70 points to James Madison. So you look there and you look at just all of that defense. Like I was not high on Bo Atkinson, who signed with Ohio State, defensive end, North Carolina, one of the top guys in the portal. And I watched that film. I'm like, oh, this guy's really good and underexposed, I guess, maybe you would say. So, which is really interesting because Mac Brown recruited really well, and the Carolinas is the place to be for defensive line talent. Like that is what Ryan Bartow used to call D-line heaven in the Carolinas. And they did a really good job of landing those guys. But they didn't develop them. And now I'm very curious to see where these guys end up at their next spot, because a lot of them have moved on. Atkinson, the latest, and of course, Campbell at linebacker. Campbell's taking on blocks, and he's freeing up safeties to have a clean shot at the running back, and they just run right by him. Like it was, and also Amari Hampton, where did he end up? Vegas or something like that. I forget where he ended up, but
with the Chargers.
He's really good. He's really good too. So that's my North Carolina intro to this whole segment. But yeah, Campbell's got some promise. I think the numbers, I don't know that they're going to translate right away to Penn State, but to fill that spot that Tamir Robinson left behind is a big deal for Penn State.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We had the same conversation about Trevor Pena coming from the ACC, coming from a position and a role in an offense where the numbers are great, the production is there, it's verified, you can see it. Will he do that at Penn State? It's just an interesting conversation. But as you mentioned, Tamir Robinson, we've seen Amari Campbell do it at a Power 4 level. Whatever you want to say about what it was, there is that assurance now on the roster of production,
which is what they value, something they covet in the portal. And 76 tackles last year, and I think you said his sack numbers may have been I don't want to say inflated, but like he did a nice job with what he was doing. But
Yeah.
I think that 6.5 sacks was it? Was that's a pretty big number for a linebacker. But especially for a guy that's 6 foot 230.
He's not going to be an edge rusher. Like some people will see that number, they see Penn State, they know the hybrids, and they're like, oh, maybe this guy's an edge rusher. And it's not, I don't want to say it's luck because timing and efficiency of movement are all important, but this was not a guy that won blocks to go get the quarterback. He was a guy that was, timed things up, and the scheme kind of delivered him unblocked to the quarterback, which is a skill, but it is not the
he's not Brandon Bell, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not the most valuable of the pass rushing skills you could have.
Right.
So he's an interesting guy. I guess the last thing, having watched a lot of him, I am a very big proponent of, are you in your gap? Now, what happens when you get there? This is college football. I'm not expecting every single player on the roster to be a dominant force at every level of their skill set. He's a guy that found his gap more often, especially at the end of the season, than he didn't. And in a Penn State defense where there's a ton of playmakers, that might be valuable for 20 snaps a game. Final thoughts here from you, Fitz, on kind of the holistic approach to Campbell. Then I want to get to Ryan and some of the conversations he's had over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com about recruiting that I think are really good as well.
Yeah, I think the expectations there with Campbell is you look at what Penn State has in the room and you feel that Tony's going to be a starter. Tony Rojas is going to be a starter no matter what. Dom DeLuca probably going to be a starter. Keon Wiley in there. And I think Campbell's in that 3-4-5 combination of Keon Wiley, Anthony Specca, and now Campbell as well. So I think that's kind of where you find those guys right now. And he's coming off a true sophomore year. I mean, he's the same age as Tony. So like, right. It's not like he's a 5th year guy coming in for 1 year. You've got a couple years to work with him. So I'm very curious to see what he does in terms of baseline testing when he gets here, how he can handle everything. He did wear the green dot for UNC last year, which was something that when we talk about the intangibles off the field, I mean, that is on the field, but like the IQ to handle that, the football smarts to handle that, goes along with being a captain, goes along with all that kind of stuff that you break down as traits that Penn State has looked for in these guys. And you see it with Kyron Hudson. Pena was a captain. A lot of these guys were in that mold. So I think it goes along with what Penn State has done this offseason in terms of fortifying its roster.
We're going to get to Ryan in just one second. We gave away a subscription to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com at the end of spring football. We also have a contest going on right now from Andy Ludicky at My Perfect Franchise. He's playing Guess the Franchise over the Blue White Illustrated message board. So if you are a subscriber here to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you can go over there, you can play the game, and if you win, you can get a subscription to the site. So check it out. And if you want to learn more information about Andy, it's a win-win. It's a twofer. 404-973-9901 or Andy at myperfectfranchise.net where you can get on his calendar. And if you're wondering, okay, that's great, but who's Andy? Well, first off, welcome to the show. This is your first ever Thursday recruiting show. Andy at My Perfect Franchise, he helps deliver people to the next stage of their career. You may have business experience. You may have middle management experience. You may be somebody who has a sum of money and a dream. Well, Andy's going to help find the best possible franchise for you to manage, whether the economy's booming, there's a downturn, there's a upheaval, there's excitement, it's a bull, it's a bear, it doesn't matter. There's always an opportunity. And if you have the right skills, you can apply those for yourself and not for another company, not for another corporation that you're just making a salary. This is the opportunity to own your own business and to determine the next phase in your life. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on the message board. You can reply to that thread. You can reply to Andy directly or Andy at myperfectfranchise.net to get started. He also has a new process to help you buy a small business if you live in a town and you've been thinking about that. He also has that process as well. So check him out if you're interested in business ownership. Appreciate Andy for being a part of the show for so long now. Ryan, Matt Ortega, you had a chance to talk to him. You're both muted, just to let you know. Matt Ortega is Terry Wiggins' coach. And at Coatesville, you had a chance to speak with him about Terry. I'm assuming you weren't talking about a bunch of other different things.
Didn't talk to him at all. Nope. Now, great conversation. Great conversation we had yesterday. Ortega's been great. We What was DeQuan Worley, Sean? How many years ago was that? It feels like a long time ago, but you're on mute still. But that was a relationship we started a while back, and last couple of months I've been trying to get Ortega, and he's just a busy guy, right? So no hard feelings there. But we finally were able to catch up and have a good talk about Terry Wiggins, and just learn more about his background, right? This is a player who was offered by Penn State last October, and now don't get me wrong, there's quite a few players who've been offered, mid-season later and merged certainly as top guys, but it felt like he really rides on the scene quickly, right? So just kind of learning more about his sophomore year. Coach explained he had a senior ahead of him, and they try to give the senior all the opportunity they could to take over. And as 6'3" athletes normally do, they normally get that job later in the year as sophomores, and that's exactly what Wiggins did. Play the final 3 or so games of his sophomore year. So just kind of learning that emergence. We knew he played a little bit as a sophomore, but just kind of learning the background of that was pretty good. And just getting his thoughts on him long term and where he stacks up, compared to some of the athletes that Coastal's had over the year. I mean, I don't know if fans remember Jay and Manny Stocker went on to Pitt. I think Avery Young went to Rutgers then. So they've had some talent over the last handful of years. But he's pointed to Wiggins as, from a length perspective and the player his size, they haven't had anybody like him. And I thought that was interesting considering some of the talent that's come through Coatesville over the years. Now, Maxwell Hiller, maybe next year that'll be a different story because he's going to be a stud of a player as well. But, just some good background on his progression and all those things. I think the big thing right now with Wiggins moving forward is just size. He really spoke highly of his IQ, his ability to make the checks. Sean was talking about Green Dot, right? The guy able to make the plays. Wiggins was doing that off the edge last year at times. So, obviously you want your middle linebacker to be that player most of the time, but for a first-year starter to take over the defense and make all the right calls and checks, that was something that Ortega really spoke highly of. I think that speaks highly of his potential, his ability to grasp the system. He's certainly going to need some time. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this year would be big for him to put on weight and size, and he'll need probably a year or so in Penn State system before he's ready for that step. But, the off the field things, right? Leadership as well. That was something he spoke incredibly highly of flat out said, he's unlike most kids. I can't have adult conversations with most kids. And Terry's one of the few that you can. So thought that spoke highly as well, as far as what Penn State looks for in players and, how all those little things are there. The athleticism's there, the size is there. Now it's all about bulking up and getting ready for Big Ten ball.
Yeah, that was the one thing I was dipping into his film recently. The size and the ability to hold the edge. It looked like he's, a new starter and a guy that needs to get a little bit bigger and stronger. So, it's good to get that kind of context and perspective from his head coach and things like that. Maturity also, you can check all those off the box for Terry Wiggins when you watch him on film. When you're talking about the length and the size and all those things, how much does he project? Did you talk at all about, like, you mentioned the things he's got to get better at? Do you have an update on any of those things in terms of where he is now or kind of where he is in the process of that evolution?
Right now they're focused on 7-on-7 and stuff. He didn't have like numbers and stuff ahead of him. I tried working on 40s, bench press, all those things. For example, I did a interview with Matthew Llama's coach earlier today. Did get some of those numbers, so we'll have that story up here in the next day or two. I'll work on that, and
that's why we
can provide some more details on that one here. The other linebacker that committed here in the next couple of days. But he didn't have it in front of him right now. And as coaches often do, they don't want to overspeak or oversell something if they don't have the actual numbers in front of them. But, he did say that
he's been around, man. He knows what's going on. And he's
awesome. I mean, there's a reason he's run the Big 33 this year. He is one of the best coaches without a doubt in PA. So great guy, Central Dauphin alum, by the way. He's my guy. But anyway, the number he did say is he thought 4.6 was a realistic number for Wiggins, and that was kind of more last year too. They haven't really run a lot this year, so I'd be curious to see if maybe this spring or summer they can get a more accurate 40 time on. I'm sure Penn State's going to have him up for camp at some point.
Yeah, we talked about both Matthew Llama and Terry Wiggins here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. If you want more of an in-depth breakdown of the journey and kind of our initial reporting, you can check that here on the site. For anyone who's curious about wanting to know a little bit more, I do want to move on to one of the bigger news items, I would say, like on the internet, social media, excitement, top 10 lists. Everyone loves their final commitment lists for certain prospects, and Penn State has been in the top 10 or top 3 or top 4 for a lot of prospects. Recently, Leo Delaney You have Sincere Johnson, and of course, Brian Harris, one of Penn State's biggest defensive tackle prospects, which I'm interested in the conversation around those lists because we're going to be talking about official visits here in just a little bit. And Fitz, whenever we talk about these top 10 lists, that's not the list that matters, right?
Correct. The official visit list is going to be what matters. Now, Brian Harris came out with a top 10, and you're thinking it is May 8th or May 7th, I guess, when he came out with that. And you should have it narrowed down by then. So I looked and I'm like, this kid's got 8 official visits. Like, he just went to West Virginia over the weekend. Like,
wow.
I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I'm still in the mindset that's like 5 is the hot number, right? Like they don't limit them anymore. So yeah, you want to check them out, and you can take them in April, which not a lot of people do because it doesn't make a ton of sense. But he was at West Virginia last weekend. He's got Stanford, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Auburn, Michigan, Mississippi State, Penn State. Like that's a lot of official visits. Penn State's the last one at June 20th. And I think Penn State is in a pretty good standing, and he was at the blue-white game a couple weeks ago. So like this kid's busy. He's all over the place. He went to Mississippi State, went to Alabama, picked up an Alabama offer. I'm sure if he can get an official visit there, I'm sure that they would be in the mix as well. So it's a lot of schools. And what you're going to find in the next month is that is going to be a grinder for a lot of guys, including Brian Harris. Like you're going to find yourself like wondering, should I still take this trip? Should I move this trip? Should I, just bag this whole thing altogether and commit somewhere? Like there's going to be a lot of that. Not necessarily with Harris, because he's, checking out all of his options and seems to be giving schools a real look. Stanford's in there. So you got to say, the academic aspect is more important than most. So it's just crazy to think about we're at May 8th and there's still 10 schools in it when you usually see a cut like Sincere Johnson cutting to 5 or, I think Dorian Barney cut it to 5, you've got, Sincere cut it to 3. So like, that's kind of where we're at in the process. But if you have all those visits scheduled and you've got the stomach for that much travel, I mean, if you want to see Starkville and Auburn and Norman and Columbia and State College and Palo Alto,
I imagine they all start to kind of look the same after a while. I would imagine they're all football facilities.
I mean, I would think so. And he just went to Morgantown. So
if State College was Palo Alto, I wouldn't have left. All right.
Yeah.
I'd still be living there instead of Harrisburg.
I was talking about the building itself, but yes, the
gotcha.
actual town. You're right.
They say
State College is beautiful, everyone. I love State College. It's not Palo Alto. Anyway.
You just wanted free childcare. Let's not talk about. Let's not beat around the bush. You were trying to find.
There's nothing free about that daycare payment I'm playing right now. But go
on. Well, actually, let's shift gears because I want to get into kind of our headline topic of the day, which is Ryan. You put in a new RPM pick this week for a decision. Last week you put it in. I'm sorry. And coming up tomorrow, I think we're going to find out that decision. So Alex Haskell is making his final college football decision before taking official visits here at the end of spring, at the beginning of the official visit season. So let's have that conversation about Alex Haskell and what you think. Where do you think he's going to land on that spectrum? Where did you predict he's going to land?
Penn State, of course, right? Look, it wouldn't be a BWI recruiting podcast without talking about Alex Haskell. I feel like we've done this about 6 in a row now. And to me, it really comes down to, I thought for a while Duke was Penn State's top competitor. He took the most visits there, spoke very highly. Of course, Gabe Infante's down there. Like there's a lot of ties to prep. And then Duke takes a couple defensive tackles and they're out of it. And then, okay, that kind of surprised me a bit, but all right. And then he takes one visit to Syracuse, one visit to Michigan. He's now been to Penn State 7 times. I mean, these kind of things. Look, I mean, it's not all about the visits anymore. We used to always say track the visits, and that's still an important thing. Of course, NIL, a lot of other things come into it now, but just from a familiarity perspective, this was Sean, how many times we go back and forth on this RPM? I felt like it was 4 times. It's really since he visited in early April. The feedback I got from that early April visit, I think it was April 3rd, 4th range. A lot of family was up for that. And that made Penn State feel pretty good about their chances. But he still had to go to Michigan for the first time. And it was going to be a one and only kind of visit, right? So that kind of was the reason we held off a bit. Others put in picks for Michigan, not long after that. But just from what we were hearing, that one didn't really make a whole lot of sense because Penn State always felt pretty confident about it. So he has not called them and committed, and it is not 100% final or anything like that, Rhett. But I fully expect it to be Penn State tomorrow. I think all their colleagues of ours expect it to be Penn State tomorrow. Sean, I don't know. Do you expect it to be Penn State tomorrow?
I think it'll be Penn State tomorrow. And I will say, in your defense, I think we've been hanging around Penn State fans very long, and it kind of rubbed off on us for this RPM because you wanted to put it in mid-April. And I was like, let's let him visit Michigan. You know how this has gone sometimes when sometimes it doesn't make any sense. He visits one time and then all of a sudden, things happen. And then Sam Webb over 24/7 puts a pick in for Michigan. And you're like, okay, how do we do this? And then, but you were like definitely on this one a few weeks ago. And we've always thought that, Penn State was the team to beat here. It's just, you never know how it's going to go with some of these guys. And I think that being close to home, being close to family is a big part for Alex Haskell. Deion Barnes being a Philly guy as well. You've got the opportunity to sort of blaze your own path for in a different kind of way there. So I like that Penn State has a ton going for it in this one, and they've treated him like a priority. This is a guy who for months I've said probably the most underrated player on Penn State's board. When you look at how Penn State has prioritized him, how good he is as a football player, I think he's the best player on that defense, which is the best defense in the state. And where he currently slots in the rankings, like I get that there's probably not a ton of like juiced upside for a first round pick type guy, but I think he's better than most on that board.
Yeah,
he was the best player on that defense last year. Sorry, T. Frank, give me 1 second.
Yeah,
Cam Smith had a great year. I still like Alex Haskell even more as far as film wise, but Maxwell Roy, Anthony Sacca, Lockley's a young up and coming guy. I mean, he's better than all of them as far as production per position and what you're looking for long term. It still is confusing to me how he hasn't gotten rated high. It's not confusing, actually. It's limited information, things like that. I mean, he camped once, 2.5 years ago? It's been a while since we've got anything as far as where he stacks up, athletically and at that kind of position where you do have information for a lot of other guys. I could see how he kind of gets knocked down a little bit and forgot about to some degree. But if you asked, anybody in Lash, this is a guy that they really kind of circled from that first camp, which I think was June 2020, would have been 2023 at this point. So I think, we'll find out tomorrow, but this is a guy that Penn State's wanted for a long time. And I think they're in a good spot together.
Just quickly here in the chat, Robert Wolfel says, share, like, subscribe, donating to the channel. Always appreciate people who are willing to support us in a way like that. And yes, please like, share, subscribe. Be like Robert and do all three of those things, and we'll be in good shape. But he also asks a question here. He says, T. Frank, where would he align with Chukara in Knowles' defense, capable of both spots or a 1-3 tech specifically? It's interesting. The more I watch, the more I'm kind of thinking there's less difference between the two positions with how Knowles likes to play this particular style, where you're holding the point of attack a lot on defense. This is not a Manny Diaz defense where you're trying to get in the backfield at all costs. So both players need to be able to play the run, and I'd say the 3 technique needs to be more athletic. I think both guys have that in them, though. The one thing I'd say about, from what I've seen watching Haskell, is his strength, play to play, does not, I think, align in a same way. I think he can absolutely get stronger. Chukara has more of that kind of innate brute force on film. So if you said, like, I have to pick, I'd say Chukara would probably be the 1 tech, and then Haskell is a little more, I wouldn't even say he's a little more agile, but he is agile, and I think explosiveness laterally is his strength, which is more of that 3 tech. And I think he's got a little bit bigger frame, so that's kind of where I would kind of differentiate. But they're very similar, and that's kind of what I'm wondering what you guys think in terms of, you're getting 2 guys. If things break the way that Ryan thinks, how does this affect Brian Harris? How does this affect some of the other guys they have on the recruiting rundown? Because position skills and all that aside, what I just said of, like, they're very similar. You're going to get the best players you can, especially D tackle, because they just need to get those best players. But how does this affect kind of the long-term view of that position for this class, Fitz?
I have a vent first, and it goes back to this last question, and it's, we try to be smarter than we need to be at times to make us sound smarter than we need to be. So we're asking about 1 tech, 3 tech. And this is very, very fresh in my mind because Deion Barnes was asked about this a couple of weeks ago. He was asked about what makes a good 1 tech, what makes a good 3 tech in this defense, all that stuff. Deion says, we just play sides. Like the 1 tech, the 3 tech, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but we're trying to do too much when we analyze it like that because these guys have to play both. Devon J. Thomas, you look at and say 1 tech. He played a lot of 3 tech last year because of the side that he was on. It depends on alignment. It depends on, which side you're shading to and things like that. So we get ourselves so wrapped up in, and T. Frank, this is not a criticism, but you're looking for an X receiver. Well, a great X receiver doesn't have to fit that profile. Like it doesn't have to be that guy. So we just get too deep sometimes in terms of what this player is, what we think he can be and where he will be. It's not that deep sometimes in the building. Like I'm thinking you're thinking, is this guy a field safety or a boundary safety? He's a safety to a lot of those guys. Like to Dex, like don't pigeonhole him to that area. Don't pigeonhole the 1 tech, the 3 tech to just being that guy. Don't say this is a strong side defensive end, a weak side defense, like give yourself the flexibility to develop that player and then mesh him into the defense, mesh him into the offense. And like I said, not a criticism of how we do things, but we try to do too much sometimes with explaining why this player is this position or something like that. Whereas these coaches look at it and say, well, this guy's denies a right defensive end. Like he plays right defensive end for us. He doesn't follow the tight end. He doesn't do all this kind of stuff. So it's just, we get so wrapped up in that. And then it goes to recruiting where we're talking about complementary assets and you just want good players to complement good players. And I think haven't jumped the shark with it, but we've gone in that direction so far and of analyzing. I think we do a great job of analyzing things like that. But at the same time, it's not all about where they land on this specific role. It's about, can you get the best players in? And Haskell is a guy that plays edge at the high school level. He's going to move inside. And I think he can play both. And you want those guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally it shouldn't matter because you can do both. Like you can play with strength and you can play with athleticism. That's the whole point of Penn State's defensive tackle recruiting is that they want athletic players. They're not looking for a big dude that just plugs gaps.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
So that's my little vent on that. As far as like I don't even remember the original question. T. Frank, you want to ask that one again?
What was our original question?
Yeah. No, it was just like, how does this affect the long-term view of that position in terms of how many more are they going to add? How many more do you think are realistic for them, that they have a shot with?
Yeah, I mean, I think they got a couple. You mentioned Brian Harris is in there. You've got some guys coming up from down south, like James Johnson. There's a bunch of guys that kind of fit into that mold. And then you eventually, are going to talk about guys that are probably ends right now that eventually end up as tackles. So, I think that you have to maximize your opportunities when the region is so good on the defensive line, on the offensive line, really, when you can find those big guys that can move. So you've got a couple of guys up in Connecticut in Marcus Almeida and Carter Gooden, teammates up there that you've offered up there. So they're going to come in. I believe Gooden's got a visit set up. I don't think Almeida has one set up, but there's a lot of options. Garrett Witherington is a guy that we've talked about from down south. Still bring him in on a visit. So suffice to say, stock up as many of those guys as you can because they're not easy to find.
Damari Simeon too.
Yeah,
the really good one. Yes, the obvious one that I forgot. There you go.
Who's been quiet, went and saw a lot of other schools, but still from Penn State's in the mix there, right? I mean,
we talked about him on the big board last week, and that you made a funny comment earlier about following the visits. And some of these guys just need to see schools. Simeon saw Penn State a couple of times, and he was one of those ones that was at the SMU playoff game. But you look at the guys that have committed to Penn State early without visiting a ton of schools. Sometimes they back off of those commitments because all of a sudden this new door opens and you're like, what did I miss in the first place? And that's actually another reason. Who were we talking? Daryl Carey, you were talking to a couple of weeks ago, and he wanted to commit. And Franklin was like, hey, you need to make sure that all this stuff works. And it sounded like a pushing off a commitment, but he ended up in the class 2 weeks later, something like that. So, so it's one of those things where you got to dot your eyes or what? I just lost the phrase right there. I'm sorry.
I always go the opposite. Just I like to mix my metaphors.
Well,
Dot your T's and cross your I's.
Yeah, and then I go into Wayne's World too. Kevin Pollak, it just kind of sidetracks me. That's how my brain works.
One thing I'll add to real quick is I think fans would be surprised at how often Penn State does do that. As far as like guys are ready to commit, and they basically are like, "Hey, look, we want you. We're not trying to give you the impression you don't." But I had a long talk with Khalil Taylor about it, and I get 2027 is a little bit different than what we're talking about. But Khalil Taylor could have committed like 2-3 weeks earlier than he did. He really wanted to, and they doubled down, tripled down, all that. And again, it's a little different with 2027 guys. I get that, but I think that happens much more often than most fans would think.
So let's take a different approach to this because coaches are now out on the road. We're going to get to our final segment where we're talking about the top contenders for some of Penn State's top targets, but Penn State's trying to make inroads and make all of that kind of less important by going out and visiting those players and seeing them in person, continuing that relationship side of things in May, where it is that contact period that Ryan talks about. So Ryan, you've been following this. Of course, social media, great place where photos pop up and you can see where players have been. Tracking this, where are coaches right now, and who are they prioritizing on that visit schedule?
All over the place, buddy. The first week was literally we had where was it on the East Coast? We'll say Northeast somewhere. I forget which one I was talking about. And then Kenny Sanders and Danny O'Brien were in Southern California. So we're talking literally every side of the country right now. Phil Troutwine's out there seeing a ton of offensive linemen. The big ones I want to hit on, we kind of hit on our notebook last week, so I'll circle back to it now. There were a couple days removed from that. Cozy Akpala is a linebacker. No, Penn State just got 2 linebackers, right? If you've watched our last 2 commit kind of breakdowns on Wiggins and Matthew Llama, I've made it pretty clear, and Sean's done this too multiple times, that like they need to get one of these national athletic linebackers that they want. That still seems to be something that they're pushing for. Not saying they absolutely have to.
Yeah, I was going to say needs carrying a lot of weight in that sense.
Right. But they want. It's certainly a want. And Akpala is a guy that, again, Texas, if you look on the surface, it makes a lot of sense that he's going to end up at Texas. But just as I've done a little more digging and kind of learned more about why he didn't make it to Penn State this year and stuff, it's hard for his family to travel. This is another example of look at the visits, right? They'll tell you everything. I don't think it tells you everything with this one. I think that there's a much stronger relationship with Dan Connor here than I'd heard that before, but now it's kind of doubling down, tripling down when we've asked about it. From what I was kind of told, like this was a player who has gone out of his way to basically apologize that he didn't make it to Penn State this year because of how badly he wants to get up there. That's kind of how it was framed to me. So it's not going to be easy to get him away from Texas. Texas is recruiting him. But I think if you ask a lot of people in that area, they'd be like, oh, Texas and Texas Tech, Texas and Texas A&M, or Texas and Oklahoma. I think Penn State is the team that Texas is fighting for this player right now. And, obviously it'll be one visit and that'll be it. Right. So multiple visits to Texas, you would think that's an edge for the Longhorns, but just the consistency with that, when you ask multiple people about how they feel about Cozy Akpala, is higher than I think a lot of people would think. So I wanted to make sure we stress that one off the bat. There's been a bunch of things on Twitter. I'm sure you guys have seen them. Kari Adams, Jaziel Hart, Sean, I'm sure you've seen those. We're going to get into those guys. I don't know how much you want to get into those because, we were going to kind of break those guys down a little bit, T. Frank, I think in, our top target segment. But Sean, if there's anybody you want to talk about, go ahead. There's a ton of guys. Just keep an eye on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, they're all over the place right now. Phil Troutwine just keeps popping up everywhere, doesn't he? He was in Texas yesterday, South Carolina with Leo Delaney. South Carolina, right? That's
North Carolina.
North Carolina with Leo Delaney earlier this week. Of course, Delaney's got 4 schools on top. I think Michigan, Strong, Clemson, Tennessee, which is kind of the same list as Carter Scruggs, although I think Clemson is probably the team to beat there for Carter Scruggs. So you've got an opportunity to build in this class. They just took Roseby Lubintis to add to Kevin Brown. So what are we thinking? 3 more spots there for offensive linemen? For sure, too. And they're not going to pass up on anybody that they covet. So you would think that spot, well, I don't see it being a race right now. But I think there's some maneuvering going on, and you talked about that on the site this morning with some visits changing dates and things like that. So that's interesting there. But yeah, Phil Troutwine's kind of the guy in the crosshairs right now. Not bad, but like
yeah, I was going to say,
that's
4 years ago maybe
under the microscope. I don't know what you call it. Like we'll take that.
He's next up.
Yeah,
he's got a lot on his plate right now.
So much of the remaining class is going to be offensive line, defensive line.
Yeah.
And those guys are going to be prevalent in this. And then you go for the big stars like Kari Adams, like Joey O'Brien, Dex and Terry Smith down to see Kari Adams yesterday. Like those guys are just on a different level. You're not shopping in bulk for defensive backs right now. Like you're talking about the best classes that you can formulate together for the offensive line, for the defensive line. I think it's going to take a lot of our energy for the next couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's get into kind of the final part of the show here, which I think will be interesting to see how Penn State's top competitors from school perspectives are lining up this year. Not necessarily that, it's always the same. It's a new flavor every year, but I like to kind of figure out where are the top competitions, who are the top contenders that Penn State, maybe in a couple of years, they face them down the road. And we point back to some of these wins and losses as to who might have the advantage on the field because they were able to secure more commitments for the class of 2026. So we're going to go through some of Penn State's top targets. This is not comprehensive. This is not, but these are players that have official visits set to Penn State. Not all of them. This is not a list 1 to however many we have here on the list of like most important to least important, although we're going to be starting with some of the heavy hitters. We're going to start with Luke Wafel, Penn State versus who are the top targets here, Ryan?
Ohio State and Texas for me. Now here's the deal. Luke Wafel has not put out his official visit schedule yet, but it is coming soon, hopefully. I've been trying to get that nailed down here for feels like a week now. But the thing most important that feels pretty locked in right now is he's going to come to Penn State. He's going to go to Texas. He's going to go to Ohio State. And USC took an unofficial visit to USC in April, and it went really well. And it sounds like USC is going to be that 4th team that gets a weekend official visit. Now, let's see as far as how many teams get midweek official visits, all that kind of stuff. I could see him maybe taking 5 or 6, but that's still kind of getting sorted out. Here's the thing, though. Like, yes, good visit to USC. He's going to go out there. Do I see Luke Wafel playing on the other side of the country from his family? I don't, honestly. Just from getting to know their family dynamics, things like that, what they prioritize, I expect him to stay closer to home. However, I will leave the caveat that I think Luke Wafel really loves Austin, really likes Texas, and anyone who's ever been down there, and I get it. It's one of my favorite towns to go to. I'll say that. So I do think Texas is very much in the mix. I actually think I would lean Penn State, Texas over Penn State, Ohio State a little bit, but it's very close. Like those three, it's more 1A, 1B, 1C than any true separation. I just know that consistently when I've asked, Texas, that has been a school that has always been brought up. Ohio State as well, but that's a little bit more recent. And of course, Penn State. So to me, it would be a slight lean Texas, Penn State if I'm trying to pick one school. But again, we're talking more.
Yeah,
1A, 1B.
Can I ask you that? I think it's also important for the rest of the conversation here. How many guys are down to 2 schools, and how many are actually considering like 3 to 5? Or Brian Harris for 10. Like I understand they've got all these official visits set up. So is it as simple as maybe they're setting up 3 official visits, but it's down to really 2 schools, and how you kind of phrased it there, or is it genuinely a lot of these guys don't know at this point? Because it seems like a lot of people, the way we decide as human beings, it's easier if it's an either or. But when you start to add more choices, it gets more confusing. So how do you view these things? And I understand that each individual person is different, but generally, how do you think of these kind of conversations when we have them?
I would need to know why Eggman doesn't like Austin. That's all I really care about right now. I have a great time in that town. But anyway, to me right now, out of the guys we're going to talk about, Grayson McHugh, too. I feel pretty confident it's going to be Penn State or Notre Dame. I feel pretty good about that one. Now, I have a story up on the site right now. I'm not going to give all the details away. I think Penn State fans probably saw Alabama, Ohio State offered in the last, week or so, maybe last 10 days. We'll see if they're able to squeeze in an unofficial visit and maybe then get an official. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State did. It doesn't really – when I from what I understand, and think he prioritizes. I don't really see him as an Alabama kind of player, but Ohio State's a respectable enough program, respectable enough school that wouldn't shock me. But I also still believe that Notre Dame and Penn State are, substantially ahead of everybody else. So to me, he's one of the few guys that truly does feel like a one-on-one kind of battle at the moment. I would throw Jazeel Hart in there as well, as far as I feel pretty confident that Penn State and Michigan are ahead of the rest. But at the same time, he did take a Notre Dame unofficial visit not that long ago. It does sound like Notre Dame's going to get an official visit. And Notre Dame's Notre Dame. Let's give them credit. They're recruiting at a high level, playing at a high level. So yeah, I can't sit here and say I'm confidently going to rule them out. But to me, right now, certainly Penn State, Michigan for Jazeel Hart, and Penn State, Notre Dame for Grayson McHugh.
Gotcha. Fitz, you got something?
Yeah, to your theory here about getting down to 2. If you're looking at jobs and you want to maximize your potential earnings, would you want 2 offers on the table, or would you want 5? Like, that's where I would go with that. Like, I truly think that there are guys that are down to a couple of schools, but you got to keep others online, right? Like,
right.
You got to continue to keep your options open just in case it's like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, could make that much. So I think that is what I'm looking at for breaking these down. And the other thing here is on the opposite side, how many of these guys actually have those options? I mean, you talk about knocking it down to 5 schools, knocking it down to 10 schools. We'll get a little bit further on the list. It's like, okay, this guy has an offer from Alabama. This guy has an offer from Ohio State, but he's got official visits to Rutgers and Penn State. And, just like
right.
It's one of those things. And I'm not sure which tape you're showing right now, but I'm trying to figure out if that's a storm or if that's just a smudge on the lens.
Really that's the beauty of high school football film.
Oh, that's Roanoke football right there, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. But no, you've got guys with options that they think they have and options that look good on graphics, but also don't have the opportunity to take those official visits. And I think that plays into it as well. So you've got an opportunity to maximize what you can get. So that's why I think, and like Grayson McHugh, like what have we said from the start, Ryan, that this kid is not very in-depth in the process. He's green to the process, and it all came for him very quickly. And he doesn't seem like a guy that's, out there fishing and all of a sudden he's down to 2 schools. Like, whereas there's other people that have more schools on the list for various reasons.
I feel like 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 years ago, I used to write all the time about how like education's important to this guy. And that's a reason why Penn State might have a real chance. This is maybe a little bit pre-COVID, a little bit more than post, but I feel like, Sean, you wrote that before. I mean, like we used to talk a lot about how like this is something Penn State really prioritizes. Obviously, especially pre-James Franklin, and James did a great job with that, maintaining that early in his career, and he still does. Don't get me wrong. Like, Penn State's very good with that. I feel like I never write that anymore. Grayson McHugh is one of the only guys in this class I think I would really fully say that about.
It's the Carter Meadows argument, right? Like, this kid is a high academic kid. Stanford, Northwestern. You've got Michigan on there, Penn State. You've got schools that have that same academic reputation. Don't parse that statement too much, but schools that make their guys go to class sometimes. But it's one of those things where now all of a sudden he's a 5-star. How much does that change what he was looking for in the first place? Because that dollar amount's going to go up. Like that's what I'm thinking here with when you talk about that, because we often get to generalize everyone, like say that, okay, everyone's just picking the highest bidder, which is not true. I mean, that's not flatly not true, but while saying that, there's also that flip side of, well, it does happen quite a bit. So, and it's one of the reasons why it's actually pretty beneficial to follow us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as my lazy pitch there. But
go for it. Dive in.
You get a much clearer idea of where these guys are thinking, because some things matter to some people, some things don't matter as much to some people. Some people need that, like have the background where they don't have that opportunity otherwise. They need that. And then there's guys that can afford, the terrible choice of phrase, can afford to take a lesser dollar amount to play where they want to play. And There was a conversation a little bit earlier in the chat from Ryan, and Ryan, I'm not ignoring you. He's saying that NIL won't matter after the House settlement. I wish we had Nate here for this one because he would take the next 14 minutes of showtime to get us to 11 o'clock. But no, it's still going to be a factor. And he follows up by saying, if all the NIL deals are run through a clearinghouse and required to be fair market value, that I assume that playing that level, or they assume that will level the playing field a little bit more across the top programs. I'm not convinced that's going to happen. Like I think it, in theory, it seems like a good idea. But I don't think, I don't buy it. Like I think that there's a form of that can possibly come, but you're still going to have money dumped on top of whatever you're getting from the settlement, like whatever your stipend, salary, whatever you want to call it, because they're not employees. But all that stuff is still going to be prevalent. Texas A&M is not going to stop paying kids because the House settlement goes through. Like that's what I'm thinking here. It just bumps that on top of it, which makes it very interesting for top level guys. I mean, we saw Pete Nakos reported yesterday that Jackson Cantwell, the number one player in the class of 2026, has an offer from Miami for $2 million. Would I pay a high school offensive lineman $2 million? I wouldn't. Not my money. I don't know how that's going to work. But it's just very interesting to see how the market has changed and how it will continue to change. And the House settlement will, I think, bring up the floor for a lot of programs. But at the same time, that ceiling is still going to be fairly unlimited.
Yeah. And that once you put money in and you give the opportunity for, I don't want to say unlimited, but as unlimited as you want it to be, it's very hard to then take that out. And we'll see, how Penn State is able to navigate that when they go after guys that are not, as you guys have mentioned, NIL and money is a part of the conversation for everybody now, but it is not the number one and only thing. But does it make a Carter Meadows a feasible possibility when the number is so far ahead of where they are, that it just becomes unrealistic for those things? It'll be interesting to see how all of this follows and how the money flows over the next couple of years. I do want to get to a couple more of these guys that we have on the list to see your opinions about where these are. Let's get to Brian Harris, because this one is fun. As we've been talking about 10 schools, and this one, it does not feel like there is a clear top. Ryan, what do you think if you had to parse it down a little bit? Do you have an idea?
Following the visits, right, which we just said don't matter, but following the visits, he's been in South Carolina a couple times in this year, which is a little bit more than most. But yeah, that's the thing about him, is that it has really been pretty much him just going on one-off visits to all these different schools and then setting official visits with the same schools that he just kind of took unofficial visits with over the last, however many months. So that's what makes it difficult to read. So I did an interview with Brian Harris at the end of April, and I text Sean immediately after and just raved about the kid, because Sean was the first one to interview him. I think, when was that, Sean? Back in a couple months ago. Yeah. And just as far as a kid who fits Penn State, oh my, I was very surprised with how articulate he is, how well thought out he's doing this recruitment. And I know you see 8 official visits, right? You think like, oh man, he's just trying to maximize all these trips, whatever it may be. No, he's really, he's
doing his homework.
Yeah, he really is. And I agree with Sean. I think he's going to get worn out a little bit. I was kind of quizzing him on that. And, he just keeps coming back to, he's like, man, I've done however many visits now, and every single visit I take, the players that I talk to all stress to make sure I maximize this. And, he went into more detail about how he's had conversation with guys who felt like they didn't. And that says a lot, especially when you're out of school, right? That's kind of
that's really perceptive to ask those questions too.
Yeah. And there's other things here too. I mean, his family is all from Philadelphia too. And if you go through his profile and look at photos with dad and, different visits they've taken, he's always in Birds gear, Sixers gear stuff. And I don't want to overthink that too much, but there is a strong family tie to.
That's it. Okay. That's it. Yep.
Hey, winners of 8 of the last 10. Anyway, but I do feel like there is a tie there that works for Penn State, and that helps Penn State. He originally committed to Maryland, right? Not too far from where that family is as well. So, look, it's too hard to say. This is certainly one that's too early to call. If we're going to talk voting terms, I guess. But I do feel like Penn State is absolutely going to be a top 3 or so school. I feel pretty confident about that.
I'm going to call this a Notre Dame flavored year because Joey O'Brien, we talked a lot about the top targets, a lot of Pennsylvania top targets that are left, and 2 from the same school. Joey O'Brien, this is one where I don't, you guys have talked about this one enough for me to know Notre Dame is one of the names here on the list, right? Mm-hmm. Is there another, is Oregon close enough to be a part of the top 2 to make it a top 3? Is this more open than you guys thought? Where do you view Joey O'Brien heading into official visit season?
First off, I'm going to ask about your sorcery. Ryan, what did I text you last night when you were watching the cars go and I was playing softball about future content? Like what did we talk? Like what were we discussing?
Doing a story about this exact thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And T Frank was not on that text. And I'm a little bit worried that he's hacked our phones. So we were going to talk about competition overlap, really. And because Dorian Barney's going to Colorado this weekend. I'm thinking, how many prospects is Penn State recruiting that's visiting Colorado right now? Well, I'm thinking Notre Dame is one, Clemson one, Oregon is certainly in that mix, Michigan. You see a lot of the same overlap, but not a ton of Colorado. So it was very funny when I opened the rundown this morning, and it's exactly what Ryan and I were kind of discussing last night. So your sorcery knows no bounds. Back to Joey O'Brien, and thankfully he's got a ton of highlights, so we've got time to talk over them. But yeah, I think that this one is still wide open despite the picks for Notre Dame, despite the confidence after the Penn State visit. But again, everywhere he goes, he loves. And hey, you're in that situation, you're going to love a lot of places because a lot of places are making everything seem great right now. As recruits, that's what recruiting is. So Notre Dame is certainly in the mix, but I also think Clemson's in there. He went down to Clemson and enjoyed it. Tom Allen's down there now. Went to Oregon. I think probably enjoyed it more than he expected to enjoy it. But came back to Penn State and really enjoyed Penn State. So I just think that it is a scenario where there's still, twists and turns left in this one. And I think Penn State's going to have a shot at the end. I don't love that Penn State's visit is in May, and then he's got a bunch of visits after that. Can they potentially get him back for the last weekend in June for an unofficial visit? That would be very nice, but I don't know that it's going to fit into his schedule. And I don't know how this kid, who's a very nice kid, is going to tell a lot of people no, which is, that's a tough one right there, man. Like that is tough to get around. When you have been in this process so long, you develop those relationships, and hey, a year from now, 90% of these people are not going to talk to you again. But in the moment, you feel bad saying no to whomever it may be if you have a decent relationship with that person. And that's one of those things that you continue to look at. But I think Penn State's in a good spot right now. But again, I said it in April. I'll say it on May 8th. What does that mean right now with all these visits ahead of them? I'm not sure that means all that much.
Let's go to another one that I think is a top target on the board, Kari Adams. Ryan, what's your sense with Kari Adams, where Penn State is in this top group of contenders?
Yeah, 6 months ago, I said they were in a great spot. And then he picks up like 20 offers in 20 days, and they're all elite, amazing programs. And I've said it before, it felt like there was a reset. Basically, the beginning of February, felt like in some ways his recruitment was kind of just starting all over again. Now, Penn State has the familiarity, right? I think he's had 4 or 5 visits to Penn State now, and that's really positive, and that's good for them. And obviously, Terry Smith is developing talent at a very high level, so that's also great. But man, when you add in, when you add in Auburn, South Carolina, Oregon, of course Notre Dame, it's an interesting mix, right? Because Penn State, Notre Dame, you see that, and then you see Oregon, Auburn, South Carolina, and they don't really fit Penn State, Notre Dame. It's just an interesting group there. Like, for example, we talked about Carter Meadows earlier, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. Okay, that makes sense. Luke Wayful, for some degree, like his guys or his schools, they make sense. Kari's are just, they feel like different kind of programs in the mix there. Sean, do you have any feel for that? Or do you feel that way, I should say?
I think Penn State's still in a really good spot here. I think that it just keeps going back. I'm sorry, I was reading text whenever you were talking, just so if this is doubling over. I think that Penn State's still in a spot there. Oregon is going to be, which by the way, I read a story on Oregon yesterday, and they're not winning as many battles as you think they usually are. Then again, they just lost out on the one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and Jared Curtis, and they immediately pick up a pick for Ryder Lyons, a 5-star quarterback. So they're doing okay. Like they're fine.
Right.
How much does this change nationally? How much does that flight from, well, he's going to go from what, Baltimore to Portland or Eugene or wherever he's going to fly into, like how much does that wear on that? How much does that wear on the family? I think that stuff kind of will matter eventually. But at the same time, you can make up for that in many ways, and Oregon's really good at that. So I do think that Penn State continues to be in a really good spot. And I think that I'm with you in the sense that 5 years ago, he might already be in the class. Like that is how much he likes Penn State. And he just got back for another visit. And I do think that Penn State's got some momentum right now. It's just a matter of all of a sudden some schools get into the mix and the math legitimately changes.
Just real quick on Oregon. I mean, Oregon's problem right now is how hard and aggressive USC is going at the moment. USC's already flipped 2 of their guys. Right. I think they already have like 25 some commits. Who's the GM that went from Notre Dame? Is it Chad something? I want to say I can't remember.
I haven't gotten it. I'm still getting coaches' names down. So
I know GMs. But my point there is that was a massive move from Notre Dame to USC. I think he's the highest paid GM now in college football or somewhere in that ballpark. And USC, obviously, we always knew they had the NIL resources and all that. Like they are just, pedal to the metal right now, gas to the floor, whatever you want to put it. They are going all in, and that's hurting Oregon, I think, on the recruiting trail a bit.
Is that well, we'll move on because we got to get to.
Now, the other thing I'll say is it's May 8th. So talk to me on December 3rd.
I was gonna that was gonna be part of the follow up. Is the dollars start flowing when you get desperate, especially if you've got more reserves than most people. Yeah. It's interesting. I'd be interested to see how many of those are the national prospects, how many of those are the regional prospects, and how they're fighting over those, because both of those schools have the ability to go national and local. So
Chad Bowden, by the way, that's the guy.
Yeah, thank you. And it happened last year. It's going to happen this year. Like you're going to prep yourself for the summer. And you're going to get a lot of guys, and you're also going to see some guys go off the board to schools that not schools that you didn't expect, but situations that you didn't expect. Guys, Michael Carroll committing to Alabama before he gets the chance to visit Penn State. Like those type of twists that you look back and you say, okay, maybe that wasn't a big surprise 6 months later, but in the time you're wringing your hair out. So that's kind of where I'm standing coming into the summer. Is like there's going to be losses, and this is modern day recruiting. That's how it works.
I got 2 more I'm curious about. Didn't put Damari Simeon on the list, but I want to get to Keyshawn Stansel, another guy that I think is a important prospect in this class, has his official visit set up. How is this one playing out in the way you see it, Fitz?
I think that you look at the ability to go out and find big bodies that can move, and defensive tackle is necessary here. It's necessary in the portal. Everybody wants these guys, and sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't. But the way to be effective with that is to stock up now, when they're high school guys, and develop them. So you're looking at a guy from North Carolina. Probably I would lean down south right now, Georgia, Tennessee, those type of programs right now. He did not get up to Penn State in the spring, which he had planned on doing. But he does have that official visit schedule. He's got a very good relationship with Deion Barnes. It's easier to go south than it is to go north. Like that's kind of how we found things to be in the last several cycles. But also NC State. And I think that you look around at this list that we're going through, and there are a couple national schools, and then there's usually one local school that stands out. So Dorian Barney, Georgia Tech, Keyshawn Stansel, NC State. Brian Harris is all over the map in terms of like what's out there, but there are situations where there are schools that you wouldn't think would be in the mix from a national level. And that's interesting to me because NC State's actually pretty good with some of these local guys. So they got Noah Rogers to come back from Ohio State. You've got this opportunity.
It's a good program. I don't think people know that NC State is a really, really solid program.
It's a really comfortable program for down there. Like you see guys that will pop up there sometimes, whether it be out of high school, whether it be out of the portal, and they feel comfortable with what they're doing in NC State when the wins have not always been there. Like they'll say that. So I think that it's very interesting to watch some of these guys, because not saying that Keyshawn Stansel ends up in the portal in 3 years, not saying that Dorian Barney ends up in the portal in 3 years, but these are guys that could end up at that outlier eventually.
Mhm.
So we will see what happens with that. And I think Penn State is a bit big to be on that list of locals, because I was going through and, well, Joey O'Brien's from Pennsylvania and McHugh is from Pennsylvania. All these guys are from Pennsylvania. I don't think that's the case with that, but there are schools that you look at and say, of these 5 schools, one doesn't really make a ton of sense, but the one is right there in their backyard. I think that does make sense. And you're looking, hey, Brandon Arrington was in here last weekend for an official visit, right? Are they going to get Brandon Arrington out of high school? Probably not. But if you can plant that seed and eventually maybe become an option when if he goes into the portal in a couple of years, that works into the math now. Like, that is something when you see Penn State hosting 70 guys this year for official visits, they're not getting half of them, more than half of them actually. But if you can set the table for yourself in the long term to understand that relationship could matter in the long run, then you do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As James Franklin has said, we want to have prior relationships that go into the portal. And if 5 stars go into the portal more often because they think that they need to see the field right away, yeah, why not? Last one here, I'm just throwing him up. He's kind of my guy, and he's also, I think, a wild card, maybe a fun one to end with. Ryan, Tavion Branch, who are the top contenders here for a guy that I think has a lot of talent, but also seems to be a little bit all over the place from what I can tell from what you guys have talked about.
Offensive line, defensive line, back to offensive line, then back to defensive line. It's been a lot of talk on where he wants to play and how open Penn State is to those possibilities. Sean, was it Deion Barnes that went up to see him recently? I'm not mixing that up, right?
I believe Deion was at Lackawanna and Branch was working out that day at Lackawanna. So okay. Yeah, he was up there.
So, there's something to watch there maybe as far as Penn State evaluating him. But I mean, for the most part, it has always been offensive line with Branch. But the thing that's difficult with Branch is, like, to me, when I look at the other options that are out there, and where Penn State sits with some interior guys, and Kevin Brown right now we have as a tackle, but I think he could play interior just as well. And we'll see. I just feel like if Tavion Branch is going to commit to Penn State, he better do it in June. And he better do it sooner than later, because it's to me, it's a situation where, like, there's a lot. I mean, this offensive line board is big and very talented, and Trout's done a great job putting himself in good positions. So we'll see. I mean, but also, as Sean said, 5 guys, like, that makes sense. 5 does. I said 2 earlier. We'll see about that. The more I think about it, Sean, I agree. It's probably going to be 5. So it will drag out a bit, but man, you got Grayson McHugh in there. You got some guys that Penn State has to get, like, very important guys. And don't get me wrong, I think Tavion Branch is an important guy to them, but I don't think he's a must, like, absolute, we're going to save you a spot till August. Yeah. And
Roseby Labintis is a strong interior candidate, and at 6'5", 350,
he's a tackle, buddy.
Is he okay? He's a tackle. Okay,
I feel confident in that one, because we've talked about this on the board a little bit.
Hasn't a tackle, but I see where T. Frank's coming from. That he could definitely be a guard. They could, both of those guys in the class could be swing guys, in my opinion.
He's Malachi Goodman, but not as good as Malachi Goodman. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think that's a
tackle,
fair comparison.
Yeah.
But to the point I was trying to make is Tavion Branch is not a tackle. He's an interior only, which I think then maybe I don't want to say limits the value, because you need interior guys, but Penn State has been working from the outside in recruiting recently.
Mm-hmm.
Guys,
so
what state does he live in? Branch,
Pennsylvania. Yeah, I know.
Yep. Okay.
I know.
What's
James and that's a good point. And as I was saying, I don't know how long they're going to wait for him. I was literally thinking the exact same thing. I was like, "Oh, you're going to trip over this one, buddy." But I don't know. It just feels like this one should have been one that should have been over by now. But I know he's flirting with Oklahoma. He's flirting with defensive line. Like, it has dragged out a little bit longer. I like Tavion Branch a lot. I thought he has a lot of potential. When I look at this offensive line board, it could go domino really fast. So just keep that in mind.
I agree with that. But Branch has official visits to Oklahoma State. That is as random as it's been for a kid up in Northeast Pennsylvania. Rutgers is still in there as well. So getting back to the original point, like, there's still some other schools in there. And then, like, Alabama offered, Notre Dame offered, but we haven't seen anything develop there for official visits. I wouldn't be shocked if, like, with his mindset, he wanted to go down to Alabama and camp or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There's so many variables here with his recruitment position. Could have been in the class. I think could have been in the class a year ago. Like,
Right.
well, maybe not
That's
but
what I
a
mean.
year ago, but like
6 months ago. Absolutely.
could have happened a while ago. But again, James Franklin does not usually turn away in-state guys. Now, there are some guys that they offer and don't follow back up with and sort of let it flow, but Branch doesn't seem to be in that mix. Branch, to me, is in the mix of a Ashton Blatt, something like that, from Pittsburgh Central Catholic. How do you handle guys like that? Reston Layman, who has not set up an official visit. The Penn State actually does want, but he hasn't set up an official visit, and he came up for the game. It's one of the more befuddling things that I've seen in this cycle. Like, how is this working out? So he probably ends up Pitt, Rutgers, something like that. But
yeah,
like I think that what I'm trying to say here is, like, Penn State has an opportunity, or has given him an opportunity to set up an official visit, and he hasn't done that, which could be very telling on his interest level. We're talking
about Reston Layman, just so people clarify, not Tavion Branch on that one.
Oh yeah. So yeah, but I think there are those guys that end up in these classes that we've seen that are in similar situations. You're thinking, is he a take? Is he not a take? But Pennsylvania,
Tavion's a take. He's like, this is a guy who camped at Penn State like 3-4 times, like wanted a Penn State offer. This was big. This was the big thing. And that's why I'm just surprised that we're now here almost 11 months later, 12, 10 months later, if you include July, like whatever it may be. And it's just like, we're still talking about it. It just doesn't make sense to me. I felt like he would have been a part of this class already. And now we're at the point where, okay, like, you just realize what could happen here. Cause I feel like Trout is in a really good position with a lot of players,
right? They have legitimately, you mentioned Grayson McHugh. They have other guys that I think are, 6'7", and if you have versatility with the guys that are already in the class, the best place to be would be taking 4 tackles and then a guy that has interior ability that maybe is a center or something like that, but then having 2 of those guys that can play on the interior, and now you've got ultimate flexibility, which, by the way, that's like Alabama level recruiting with Nick Saban, of the ability to just play guys wherever you want them and where they best suits you, not necessarily in the long run of making. They're not making hard choices. They're making the choices that are best at this point, which is really impressive.
Ryan, the Caleb Brewer recruitment, does that seem similar to Branch in this situation? Like, you're thinking about positional versatility, in-state guy, nice offer list. Probably thought he would commit a little bit earlier than he did. But it's
at the end of the day, what did James do? James said, "We're an in-state guy. We're taking him." That's exactly how Caleb Brewer played out. There was a lot of questions. Like, they like him, but James, at the end of the day, that Caleb Brewer, big reason for that. James said, "We're taking him in-state. I don't want to lose a guy like that."
As an athlete, like, it didn't cut into Trout's numbers, didn't cut into Deion's number. Was Deion that? Yeah, Deion's numbers. So I think that's an interesting parallel, and I think there's probably a similar outcome there.
Good. Yeah.
This is a really good conversation. I think that's a great place to end the show. So we're not going to end the show there. We're going to give people the reminder coming up tomorrow. We may have breaking news. If Ryan is right, we'll have more on Alex Haskell coming up after his decision, whenever that news breaks. And of course, we'll have more when all of these decisions break. They're going to eventually happen. So make sure you subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, and you enable notifications so that when all of those unscheduled things happen, you're one of the first to hear about it. We'll be back next week on Tuesday with the Penn State football show. We'll be talking about, I think we're going to be doing better or worse. Is this position group better or worse than last year? And does that mean Penn State's going to another Final Four? Well, we'll discuss some of those things on Tuesday. For Ryan Snyder and Sean Fitz, I'm Thomas Francar. We'll talk to you then.